Hey everyone! Today, we're diving into something that sits right at the edge of offensive and defensive cybersecurity. We're not talking about simple vulnerabilities here. We're talking about how modern systems break in unexpected ways. Because in real-world security, it's rarely brute force, it's usually assumption failure. And today, we break down 5 advanced exploitation techniques that security engineers actively defend against today. Welcome to BlueHat CyberSec Academy. Now let's step straight into the first one. So imagine this, a Gzip bomb attack. A Gzip bomb is a specially crafted compressed file that expands into an enormous amount of data when decompressed. The attack exploits a simple mismatch, storage efficiency versus runtime resource consumption. And here's what makes it dangerous. A small file can expand into gigabytes, or even terabytes in memory. It can crash parsers, logging systems, or security scanners. And it is often used as a denial-of-service vector against file processing pipelines. Now, why does this even work? Compression algorithms detect repeated patterns efficiently. Attackers exploit this by creating highly repetitive structures that decompress exponentially. So from a defensive standpoint, you limit maximum decompression ratios. You enforce file size thresholds before extraction. You use streaming decompression with resource caps, and you sandbox file processing tasks. Now let's move into something deceptively simple, but extremely dangerous. Zip slip. Zip slip is a vulnerability that occurs when archive extraction does not properly validate file paths. A malicious archive can contain files with path traversal sequences that escape intended directories. Now think about the impact. Files may be written outside the extraction folder. They can overwrite system files or application binaries, and it is frequently exploited in CI/CD pipelines and update systems. The root cause is surprisingly basic. Developers assume zip contents are safe, but fail to normalize file paths before writing them to disk. So the defensive approach becomes very clear. You normalize and validate all extracted file paths. You reject entries containing traversal patterns. You extract archives into isolated directories, and you use secure archive libraries with built-in protections. Now let's shift into something that feels harmless at first glance. PDF JavaScript Malware. PDF files can contain embedded JavaScript, forms, and interactive logic. And while this was designed for automation and usability, it has been repeatedly abused. So what makes it dangerous? It can trigger actions when a PDF is opened. It may exploit vulnerabilities in PDF renderers, and it can be used for phishing or memory corruption attacks. Now, conceptually, how does exploitation happen? Attackers embed scripts or malformed objects that execute within vulnerable PDF viewers, often targeting outdated software. So defense becomes very practical here. You disable JavaScript in PDF readers where not required. You use hardened, up-to-date PDF rendering engines. You open untrusted PDFs in sandboxed environments, and you employ content scanning and malware detection. Now let's talk about something that lives in almost every modern web application: URL path confusion. URL path confusion exploits inconsistencies between how different components interpret URLs, browsers, reverse proxies, and backend servers. And here's why that matters. Sensitive endpoints may be exposed unintentionally. Access control rules may be bypassed due to parsing mismatches, and it can lead to unauthorized data exposure. Now, why does this happen? Because different systems normalize or interpret URL encoding, slashes, or parameters differently, creating what we call a split-brain routing logic. So the defensive strategy is about consistency. You standardize URL parsing across the stack. You normalize paths before authorization checks. You use a single trusted routing layer, and you enforce strict allow lists for sensitive endpoints. Now let's move into something that doesn't attack passwords directly, but attacks logic itself: password shucking. Password shucking refers to bypassing login systems. By exploiting weak trust boundaries around authentication flows, rather than cracking passwords directly. So what makes this dangerous? It targets logic flaws instead of credentials. It can bypass authentication under certain misconfigurations, and it often remains invisible to brute force detection systems. Now, the common root issues usually look like this: improper session validation. Trusting client-side authentication states weak integration between identity provider and application logic, so the defense becomes non-negotiable. You enforce server-side authentication checks on every request. You use secure session management, short-lived signed tokens. You implement strict authorization middleware, and you continuously audit authentication flows, not just login pages. Now, if you zoom out for a moment, what ties all of these techniques together is not advanced hacking skill in the cinematic sense, but assumptions made by systems. This file is safe because it's compressed. This archive stays in this folder. This PDF is just a document. This URL will be interpreted consistently. If you're logged in, you're authorized. Security failures usually begin when those assumptions go unverified. Modern defense is therefore less about reacting to exploits and more about designing systems that assume input is hostile, inconsistent, and unpredictable by default. And now, before we wrap this up, let's turn this into a quick challenge. Think like a security engineer for a moment. If a file expands from a few KB into several GB after extraction, what type of attack might that indicate? Why is zip slip dangerous even if the file contents look harmless at first glance? What makes embedded JavaScript in PDFs risky even before a user clicks anything? How can different interpretations of a URL lead to security bypasses? And finally, why is relying only on being logged in a dangerous assumption in authentication systems? Take a moment. Think through them seriously, because these are the exact mental patterns real attackers rely on breaking. And if you've followed all the way here, you're already thinking beyond surface-level cybersecurity. This is exactly the mindset that separates casual learners from real security engineers. This was part of the Advanced Hacking, Attacks, and Exploitation playlist. So if you want to go deeper into how real-world systems break, and more importantly, how they're defended, make sure you like this video, share it with your cybersecurity circle, and subscribe. Because in the next session, we're going even deeper into real-world exploitation patterns and defensive architecture thinking. See you in the next one.